Well, as I mentioned earlier this week, I've been watching a lot of Paul Cockshott recently, but I did actually find in his back catalogue one video I particularly disagreed with, and because I'm a confrontational sort of chap, I mean, I found a lot of his material fascinating, to be fair, absolutely fascinating, but one video in particular I took exception to was his critique of the Marxist philosopher Louis Althusser, whose understanding of my ideology underpins my own. In fact, in a brand new book that I've brought out, Applied Elite Theory, there's a whole chapter on Althusser and how I think his theory of ideology is helpful, still useful for explaining the world today. So this is me from about a week later after I first recorded this video, because I realised that I hadn't actually set up who Louis Althusser was, why his theories are important, and why I'm discussing this at all. And I'll just give you a very quick guide to Althusser and his ideas. It turns out I've actually described these already in my brand new book, Applied Elite Theory. I'll be reading from this in a moment where I talk about Althusser. But first of all, who was he? What's the very quick version? He was a French Marxist philosopher who was active in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. Mainly in Paris. He was a mentor to Michel Foucault, among others. Very, very influential within the French Communist Party of that period. He had a bit of a reputation for towing a kind of pro-Stalinist line, even after the point of de-Stalinization. He kind of low-key defended Stalinism, and he is also famous for killing his wife in 1980, and he pled insanity and somehow avoided a kind of lengthy jail term, even though he killed his wife. Quite how that worked, I don't know. This is what he looked like. Now, the fact that he killed his wife is neither here nor there. When we're talking about his core ideas, I'm not one of those people who wants to go on kind of biographical readings. Whether it's significant or not, I don't know. I mean, possibly his own theory, possibly the fact that he saw our ideology worked led him to despair. You could theorize, but I don't want to linger too much on that one biographical detail. His famous books, one of them is For Marx, where he talks about overdetermination and contradiction. Another one with Etienne Balibar is Reading Capital. But probably his most famous work is the essay Ideology and the Ideological State Apparatuses. That's collected in this book, Lenin and Philosophy, which is probably his most cited work. But he was also interested in disputing humanist social contract theory. So, for example, he's got critiques of Rousseau in this book here. He is also somebody who is interested in Machiavelli and theories of pure power politics, which obviously, as someone into elite theory and Machiavellianism, is of interest to me. And his stuff on that is in this book, Machiavelli and Us. Also, I recently discovered that Althusser scholars have been at work actually bringing into publication works that were not available. So all of these books I had back from my undergraduate days and my days of studying Althusser, because he's someone I have quite a long history with. I've grappled with his basic ideas my whole life, or my whole kind of intellectual life, because I find them profoundly disturbing. But they've been working to publish stuff that he wrote that was never published, like stuff in his private collection and so on. He wrote a book called What Is to Be Done, which is obviously a play on the Lenin. I've been working through that. Some really interesting stuff in there, which I'll make a video on soon. But also that famous essay, Ideology and the Ideological State Apparatuses, was actually taken from a book called On the Reproduction of Capitalism, which was never published, and they've now reconstructed it, even though it was not completed or not published in his lifetime. It is now available. I'm still working through these because, to my knowledge, these are brand new. I didn't even know. I mean, they're not brand new, but they're new on the market fairly recently. So that is of interest. Now, why is Althusser so interesting? It is because he was the theorist, or the Marxist theorist, for the notion of how it is that capitalism keeps people from rebelling against the system. Why is it that why is it that the workers don't rise up and overthrow the ruling class? That's a question that many people involved in British politics or who are politically active at the moment keep on asking, like, how awful is the government, and yet people still don't rise up? What's it going to take? What's it going to take for the people to overcome? Now, obviously, as students of elite theory, we know it takes an awful lot, and that the disorganised mass will always be outmanoeuvred by the organised minority. However, ideology, or the role of how people relate to the world around them, or how they see their imagined relations between themselves and everybody else, is very important. Now, in this book, Applied Elite Theory, I have a section, quite a lengthy chapter called Defining Ideology, and in it I'm basically defending my own thesis derived from Pareto, that ideology, like a political formula, most of the time is BS, 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 therefore I rule, i.e. a post hoc justification of stuff that people already in power are doing. Now, I draw on Althusser in coming to terms with my own definition of, like, coming up with my own definition of ideology. So in the process, I have to explain what Althusser's idea is. And I'll just start reading from page 96 here. I say, ideology is not an add-on or something that can be picked off a supermarket shelf. Now I'm a Marxist, now I'm a fascist, now I'm a classical liberal, now I'm a Christian. This is how most people think about it, but they are wrong. Marxism, fascism, classical liberalism, and so on are just sets of ideas which were once ideologies, and now, for all functional purposes, they are dead ideologies. If history is the graveyard of aristocracies, as Pareto once put it, then the history of ideas is the graveyard of ideologies. The better analogy for ideology is the relationship between a goldfish in a goldfish bowl and the water in which they swim. The goldfish is you. The water is ideology, specifically the dominant ideology of the epoch in which you find yourself. And as I've talked about elsewhere, I believe the dominant ideology of our epoch is something called the Boomer Truth Regime. You can watch my old videos on that if you're interested. Now, there are other goldfish. It's not just you as a goldfish, everybody else is one too. Your mother, your father, your brothers and sisters, your friends, your school teachers, your government ministers, news anchors, the actors and producers of your favourite movies and TV shows, everyone you know, everyone you love is also a goldfish. But everything they do and everything they produce is to maintain the sanctity of the water in the bowl and to ensure that nobody ever looks outside that bowl. Even if there are wild rumours among the goldfish sometimes that beyond the bowl there's a whole room out there and a wider world. All the other goldfish quickly, just like Agent Smith in The Matrix, work to ensure that the sanctity of the water is maintained and that the boundaries of the bowl are not breached. Okay, analogies are not my strong point. I'm not Moldbug, but I hope you get the idea. So that's one little bit, and then I'm going to skip forward about 10 pages here, where I summarise Althusser's basic idea. So we can summarise Althusser's theory as follows. Number one, ideology is the representation of the imagined relationship between individuals and the world around them, which serves to reproduce the means of production, that is, the workforce required to keep the economy and the state running in an orderly manner. 2. Ideology has always already interpolated the individual even from the moment they are born, in so much as they are already have an ideological role. Number 3. However, to be truly interpolated, the individual must accept their ideological role consciously and willingly and say, Amen, so be it. That is, they have come to peace with the fact that this is who they are. My name is Jill. I am a teacher. I work at this school. I vote for Labour, whatever. Number 4. Ideologies have a material existence in state apparatuses such as schools, families, churches, the media, and so on. And these are called ISAs, that is, ideological state apparatuses, ISAs. These ISAs help to interpolate individuals fully and maintain the illusion that individuals are free and autonomous persons actively choosing their own roles in life. Number 6. In fact, they are not free. As per 2, they always already are interpolated by ideology. This illusion of freedom means that individuals, quote, work by themselves to perform their ideological function. For example, a coal miner goes to work every day believing he is doing it of his own accord and for reasons with which he agrees, probably for his own benefit or for the benefit of his own family. Number 7, between ISAs there are many contradictions that are typically, quote-unquote, overdetermined by being displaced as if they were trivial and of little consequence. Number 8, history is not continuous, but a series of ruptures, that is, between these ideological epochs or epistemes. And number 9, in order for one of these ruptures to take place, the many contradictions between ISAs and in ideology must be overdetermined by becoming fused together to create an irresistible force against which the ruling class has no defence. Now don't worry, I'm going to explain what all of this means in a moment. Okay, first some crib notes on Althusser. As I summarised, ideology has a material existence, ideology has no history, ideology interpolates the individual as subject, there is no outside of ideology, and in the last instance, every system must rely on force. So when ideology fails, man with a gun comes out. So let's take each one of these in turn, so you absolutely understand it as I do. Ideology must have a material existence, since it is defined as the representation of the imaginary relationship between individuals to their real conditions of existence. This is why, when you see old statues pulled down and new statues of George Floyd, etc., erected in their place, you care. If those statues were meaningless, or if the new statue of George Floyd were meaningless, you wouldn't care. This is ideology, okay? Has a material existence. This is why it matters if an old church is turned into a leisure centre or a mosque. Ideology has no history because where there is man, there is ideology. There's always the goldfish bowl, okay? There is always a goldfish bowl. Since this is the case, one cannot accurately talk about ideology having a history, since it is a constant state. For Althusser, it would be something like, if we were talking about the history of ideology, it would be a little bit like talking about the history of human breathing. That is, viewing it structurally, people have just always breathed. People have always been in the ideological goldfish bowl. The ideology might change, but the actual structural relationship stays the same, according to Althusser. For Althusser, so to reconcile this with some basic elite theory, we can say something like, humans are a political animal. Power generates ideology to justify itself. Where there is politics, there is ideology. Therefore, where there are humans, there is ideology. Althusser's concept of interpolation essentially concerns itself with the mechanics of social conditioning, or if you prefer, indoctrination or brainwashing. For him, this starts even before you are born. There is a fourfold mechanism by which the subject accepts himself in ideology and says, Amen, so be it. This is when you essentially accept your place in society. I am a bus driver, I live in Kent, I vote Labour, whatever. So long as the majority of people say Amen and never look for, let alone question, the boundaries of the goldfish bowl, everything functions as it should. The system does not need to use force most of the time because individuals work by themselves. Perhaps an extreme version of this is the house slave. Think of the character played by Samuel L. Jackson in Django Unchained. Remember this guy? In a sense, for Althusser, this is most people, all people, most of the time. So given what we have said so far, it stands to reason that there can be no outside of ideology. The best anyone can hope for is the replacement of one ideology with another. The situation of human life free of the goldfish bowl is rendered as a pipe dream in Althusser's analysis. Finally, and this is important, remember that in his system, that as well as there being ISAs, that is the ideological state apparatuses, there are also RSAs, the repressive state apparatuses. And he insists that, even if the moment is endlessly deferred in the last instance, the RSAs will eventually kick into gear. In other words, no matter how sophisticated and effective the ISAs, eventually a man with a truncheon or a gun is going to be there to tell you what to do. When I used to lecture on this back in the day, my example was always the 2011 London riots, in which I recall vividly the response time of the riot police was less than 1 hour. Other examples are available. Combination of COVID and January the 6th have furnished us with plenty more of them. And even if we fast forward on since when I wrote this, in Britain we've had the Southport riots, and there's been many other cases where the men with the truncheons come out quickly. Okay, I think I'll stop there because I want to get to the core topic of this video, which is where I think Paul Cockshott, who's a very interesting Marxist economist, is too literalist in the way that he takes Althusser and doesn't quite understand what I've just laid out. So I'm going to get back to past AA. Sorry for this lengthy diversion, but I think you'll get more out of the subsequent video if you actually understand what I've just explained. You may need to watch it a few times because I realise this stuff is dense, but trying to give you an education here, guys. All right, back to past AA. I am future AA. Back to past AA. And Cockshott, in his analysis of Althusser, I'll play a little bit of it here, his critique, I should say, I think gets Althusser wrong. Let me just play the clip of Cockshott, and then I'll explain where he's gone wrong here.
Now, I'm going to critique this theory. Obviously, I wouldn't just set out to explain it. I'm starting out on the role of ideology. What's wrong there? Well, he overestimates the importance of ideology for capitalist production. And basically what he's doing is confusing the role of ideology in capitalism and feudalism. He makes specific claims that schools are essential for the reproduction of capitalist relations of production, which I think is false. And in the end, he misrepresents the true role of ideology, which is not to reproduce capitalist relations of production, but to reproduce capitalist political domination in the political system, in controlling how people vote. Now, why do I say he overestimates it? The point is that under capitalism, the relations of production are self-reproducing. They're reproduced by the law of value. They don't depend in any way on a belief in capitalism. Workers don't have to believe in capitalism. They can be committed socialist voters. They can be committed communists. But if they have to sell their labour to firms, they're still going to be exploited. The point is they've got no choice but to sell their labour power. They don't do it out of ideological conviction.
So this understanding of Althusser from Cockshott, I think, is a little bit too literal-minded. Cockshott is still thinking like an economist, right? And that's pretty obvious. But he's arguing that Althusser says that ideology is necessary to reproduce capitalism within the subject in order to recreate the workforce, something like this. And Cockshott rightly points out that the actual beliefs of people under capitalism do not matter because it reproduces itself at the level of how the economy works, basically, right? I.e., if you don't go to work, you don't eat. So whether you're a capitalist or a socialist, doesn't matter what your actual beliefs are, okay? You still have to take part in the market economy, in wage labour, and that's how they get you. That's what Cockshott is saying. So that the ideology part is actually unnecessary to the functioning, okay? But this is not what Althusser was saying at all, okay? He wasn't saying that capitalism requires everybody to believe in capitalism in order to reproduce itself. He was trying to answer a quite different question. The question he was trying to answer is not how does capitalism reproduce itself, but rather why is it that the revolutions predicted by Marx in London and in Paris and in New York, right? This is where the workers of the world were meant to unite and overthrow and rise up against the bourgeoisie, okay? It didn't happen. It happened in Russia and it happened in China. These were agricultural peasant economies. And Althusser was trying to understand why didn't it happen in Paris? Why didn't it happen in London? Why don't the revolutions happen? What stops people rising up? And this is what the essay and the whole idea of ideology comes into play, okay? And it doesn't really matter what you fill that with, right? I.e., the ideology could even be something like wokery, right? To take a recent example, wokery. Ostensibly, this is left-wing. Ostensibly, all of the people who believe in wokery paint themselves or think of themselves as anti-capitalist. And yet, they're reproducing in themselves good capitalist subjects. This is something that Cockshott himself should easily be able to spot, okay? They're not actually stepping outside the containment vehicle of the capitalist worldview. It's easier to think of ideology, as Althusser explains it, as like a goldfish bowl. Okay, you're a goldfish, and all the water around you, all of the basic assumptions people have about the world, are contained in that quote unquote ideology. Even if you can spot contradictions within it, even if you paint yourself as oppositional within that ideology, capitalism has a way of being able to, how can I put this, it's got a way of being able to deal with that such that you're not actually rising up. You're still caught within the matrix, if that makes sense. And this is actually what Althusser was trying to get at. Okay? And that is why he scoffed at the 1968 riots in May 68. They'd all read Althusser. They were, chimping out and jumping up and down on cars and, and he scoffed at them and he said they were being juvenile and that this wouldn't amount to anything. And here we are all these years later, and he was right, wasn't he? He was right. France was not experiencing an actual revolution then. Just as Britain has not experienced a revolution, just as America has not experienced a Marxist revolution. In fact, what has happened is that leftism was commodified and sold back on Che Guevara t-shirts or on university courses, and even Althusser himself was commodified, packaged and sold as cultural studies degrees, which is what Cockshott points to. So ironically, and this is one of the things that has always struck me, all of these people doing feminism and cultural studies and Marxist readings in English departments up and down the country, they're taught all of these tools of how to deconstruct ideology, but then they never turn it back on themselves, they never turn it back on the system that we're actually living under. And so the net result of what is happening is that they too become good capitalist subjects, literally in the case of universities, pumping out employees for Microsoft and Samsung and Google, you name the company, they're out there reproducing capitalism within themselves, even if their actual beliefs are quite at odds with free market economics or something like that. That doesn't really matter, because the content of the ideology is less important than the fact that you're caught in it. This is what Althusser was saying. And another issue with Cockshott's view of Althusser here is that, again, too literal-minded. He had a problem with the specifics. He was getting caught up on, in the feudal era it was this, and in this time it was this, and he was basically saying that Althusser was being metaphysical. He was thinking in a metaphysical and almost religious way rather than in a materialist Marxist way when he argues that ideology has no history. But what Althusser was trying to say is that in every human society ever, there is something like this goldfish bowl that the people who are caught in it can't see outside of. Okay, and it's very, very difficult, because it isn't simply the official ideology, a set of beliefs that you can tick off. It is an entire ecosystem, and in our current system in the West, that includes all of the wokes and the anti-wokes and the left and the right and Labour and Tory and GOP and Democrat and the whole thing, Reform and Nigel Farage, they're all part of it. Even this Jack Palensky that I did the video on last week, they're all still part of one system. What they're actually saying doesn't matter. What they actually believe doesn't matter, because they're still stuck in it and cannot see outside of it. Now a much more interesting question that many people put to Althusser himself, and many people may still put to people who is how do you ever get to the point where you see outside the goldfish bowl? How do you ever get to the point where you're seeing things scientifically, as Althusser would put it? And that is a good question. It's very hard, and it takes a lot to get that magical third eye position to see things as they really are, as Althusser puts it. But I believe it is still possible. I do believe it's possible, but you can actually see the number of people who are able to do it. The number of people who are able to step outside and see the system in its totality from the outside is vanishingly small. Okay, and all the things I talk about with slop and left and right, and people getting caught in these dialectical slop loops, shows how difficult it is. right? Online, people talk about taking the red pill, taking the red pill. But the number of people who have actually taken the red pill to the point where they're able to see the whole thing for what it is very rare, very small. Okay, maybe this is what turned Althusser himself mad. Of course, he famously ended up killing his wife and pled insanity. But maybe he drove himself mad because he was one of the rare people ever to be able to do this, to actually see outside of it and to see truly that the students in 68 weren't doing anything that the system couldn't deal with already. It's a very, very difficult thing. And I was kind of disappointed in the Cockshott video. And I'm putting this out there basically with a with the half chance, basically, that Cockshott might see it and respond. Because this is the kind of oppositional character I am. Or that some other Marxists may respond. Maybe they also want to defend Althusser against Cockshott. Or maybe they want to say Cockshott is right. But this I think is important. Because I really do think that of all of the leftist thinkers there have ever been, Althusser really was onto something. Okay? And, I mean, as you can read in the book, in Applied Elite Theory, I believe that Foucault was a backward step. Because Althusser, despite what Cockshott says, was materialist. He did actually see the significance of physical repression and the man with a gun being there ultimately, okay, as a backstop, as in the final analysis, the point of last return for any regime is the man with a gun, the hard managerial power. I mean, we're seeing it more and more as things are breaking down in the West at the moment, okay, but to get to that point, there's an awful lot. There's so many other layers of the onion that you have to peel, and we've seen it. We're actually seeing those layers of the onion, whether it's on the left or on the right, reveal themselves more and more. Okay, as the system goes through its various backstops. You know, Donald Trump in America or Farage here, for example, they're still very, very bound up with what I call the boomer truth regime, okay? Being able to get to the point where you truly step outside that boomer truth regime that I talk about, very difficult. And when I look at the left, very few on the left are able to do that as well. It's a very rare thing, okay? And this is ultimately what Althusser is talking about, how difficult it is. He actually says nobody ever says I am in ideology because they can't see it. They can't see it. Only after you've stepped outside of it can you then say, oh yeah, I used to be that thing over there. But invariably they get caught up in a new matrix. So it's a very difficult thing to escape, and it's something that we've been watching it play out. So there it is. Let me know what you think in the notes. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, of course. You can look up, you can read the essay, you can read what I've said in Applied Elite Theory, you can watch Cockshott's video. But if this is something you really are interested in, I'd be fascinated to see any responses. Ultimately, also, I think Althusser is right that there has been no society ever in history that hasn't had this situation of most of the people in that society being the goldfish surrounded by the goldfish bowl. This is what he's talking about with ideology has no history. And this is, I mean, ever since I read that essay when I was an undergraduate, I've struggled with it. It's the thing I think about most, to be honest. So, yeah. Anyway, pick up Applied Elite Theory, pick up a course at the academic agency, and I'll catch you next time.
If you liked this video, be sure to like and subscribe. You can join the channel for thousands of hours of past shows in the archive and hundreds of videos. If you have any questions, you can leave a super chat or a super thanks, and I'll be sure to pick it up during my weekly office hours, which run every Tuesday afternoon. I also provide courses at the academic agency, which I encourage people to buy. Thousands of students now have taken the Trivium to improve their skills in writing, logic and rhetoric. Just 3 of many courses available. Buy it now. But most importantly of all, friends, get out.